Blackwell, you're out. Colonel Marcus Vance's voice cut through the briefing room like a blade. Lieutenant Isadora Blackwell felt every eye in the room turn toward her, some with pity, others with barely concealed satisfaction.
Sir?
She managed, though she already knew what was coming.
Stone's back from leave early. He'll be taking tonight's supply run to FOB Alpha.
Vance didn't even look up from his clipboard.
You can handle hangar watch instead.
Captain Derek Stone leaned back in his chair, smirking. Sorry, backup. Maybe next time. The emphasis on her nickname was deliberate, meant to sting. Captain Nathan Cross chuckled. Come on, Stone, don't be cruel. Isadora's got plenty of time to learn the ropes. What is it now? 18 months on base? Still plenty of runway ahead. 18 months, Stone repeated, shaking his head. Most pilots log more real flight time in 6 months than she has in her entire deployment. But hey, someone's got to handle the paperwork and overnight shifts, right? The room erupted in low laughter. Isadora felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned not to react. Reaction only made it worse. That's enough, Colonel Vance said, though his tone suggested he didn't really mind the banter. Stone, Cross, prep for departure at 2100 hours. Blackwell, report to Technician Fletcher for hangar assignment. As the other pilots filed out, chatting about their upcoming missions and weekend leave, Stone paused beside Isadora's chair. Hey, back up, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. You know what your problem is? You think studying old flight manuals and practicing dead reckoning makes you special. But this isn't the 1970s. Real pilots use real technology. Maybe if you spent less time playing with compass headings and more time building actual experience, you'd get somewhere. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone in the empty briefing room with nothing but the echo of words she'd heard too many times before.
They called her weak, a nobody, the quiet one you barely noticed. But then the lights went out. All of them. And suddenly, the one everyone underestimated became the only hope for survival. What happens when the world goes dark and the weakest among us rises to lead? Welcome to Quiet Tales Studio. Before we begin this powerful story of courage rising from silence, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us share these incredible tales with the world. The helicopter hangar at Fort Meridian was never quiet, but tonight it felt different. Lieutenant Isadora Blackwell sat alone on a metal crate, her flight manual open but unread in her lap. Around her, the massive CH-47 Chinooks stood like sleeping giants, their rotors still and shadows long under the fluorescent lights. She'd been at the base for 18 months now, and in all that time, she'd flown exactly 7 missions. 7. While Captain Derek Stone had logged over 200 hours, and Captain Nathan Cross never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his combat decorations. Backup pilot, they called her. Sometimes just backup, never by her real name. Isadora didn't mind the nickname as much as she minded what it represented. She wasn't their first choice. She wasn't their second choice. She was the person they called when everyone else was unavailable, sick, or dead. Tonight was supposed to be different. Colonel Marcus Vance had finally scheduled her for a real mission, a supply run to Forward Operating Base Alpha, just 30 miles north. Nothing glamorous, but it was flight time, real flight time. But then Captain Stone had returned early from leave, and just like that, her mission became his mission. Her opportunity became his routine, Tuesday. Sorry, Blackwell, Colonel Vance had said without looking up from his paperwork. Stone's got seniority. You know how it works. She did know how it worked. She'd known for 18 months how it works. So here she sat, reading the same page of the flight manual for the 4th time, when Technician Owen Fletcher approached with his usual apologetic expression. Lieutenant Blackwell? Owen was one of the few people who used her actual rank and name. I hate to ask, but we're short-staffed tonight. Would you mind taking the midnight hangar watch? I know it's not really pilot duty, but... It's fine, Owen. Isadora closed the manual and stood. I wasn't sleeping anyway. The midnight watch was exactly what it sounded like. Sit in the hangar office, monitor the radio, and make sure nobody stole a helicopter. It was grunt work. The kind of assignment they gave to new recruits or pilots who weren't trusted with anything important. At 11:47 p.m., Isadora settled into the creaky chair behind the watch desk. The radio crackled with routine check-ins from the perimeter guards. Everything normal. Everything quiet. She pulled out her personal notebook, not the official flight manual, but her own collection of emergency procedures, manual flight techniques, and old-school navigation methods that the newer pilots had never bothered to learn. Her grandfather had been a Vietnam-era pilot who flew Hueys with nothing but compass, altimeter, and instinct. He'd taught her that technology fails, but skills don't. "Always know how to fly without the computers, Izzy," he'd told her when she was 12. "Someday that knowledge might save lives." The other pilots thought she was old-fashioned for studying manual flight procedures. In an age of GPS and automated systems, why would anyone need to know how to navigate by landmarks or fly without electronic assistance? Isadora studied because she understood something they didn't. Being prepared for everything meant being prepared for the moment when everything goes wrong. At 2:31 a.m., everything went wrong. The lights didn't flicker, they didn't dim, they just stopped. One moment, the hangar was bathed in the harsh white glow of industrial fluorescence. The next, absolute darkness swallowed everything. Emergency lighting should have kicked in immediately, but even those remained dark. Isadora's training took over instantly. She reached for the radio, but the display was black. Dead. She tried her cell phone. No signal, no power. Even the digital clock on the wall had gone dark. This wasn't a simple power outage. This was total electrical system failure. In the distance, she heard shouting from the main compound. Confused voices, boots running on concrete, the sound of doors slamming. But here in the hangar, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of aircraft, she was alone with her thoughts and her training. She felt her way to the emergency supply cabinet, muscle memory guiding her hands to the flashlight she'd seen Owen store there weeks ago. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the helicopters exactly as she'd left them. But now they looked different. Without their electronic displays glowing, without the hum of auxiliary power units, they seemed less like flying machines and more like elaborate sculptures. The hangar doors were manual, thank God. Isadora cranked them open just wide enough to slip through, then made her way toward the main compound. What she saw there made her stomach drop. Fort Meridian was completely dark, every building, every streetlight, every vehicle. Even the backup generators that should have powered essential systems were silent. In the distance, she could see that the surrounding town had also gone dark. Whatever had happened, it wasn't limited to the base. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the sound she heard coming from the eastern perimeter, the distant crack of gunfire. The command center was chaos. Officers shouted orders in the darkness while subordinates fumbled with dead radios and useless computers. Emergency candles provided the only light, casting dancing shadows on the walls like some medieval war council. Colonel Vance stood at the center of it all, his usual composure cracking, as he tried to manage a crisis without any of his technological crutches. "What's the status on communications?" he barked. "Everything's down, sir," replied Sergeant Travis Kane. "Radio, satellite, landlines. It's like every electronic device on the base just died." "EMP?" suggested Captain Stone. "Has to be," Vance nodded grimly. "But who? And how did they get close enough to hit us without triggering perimeter alarms?" That's when Sergeant Blake Morgan burst through the door, breathing hard. "Sir, we've got movement on the eastern fence. Thermal imaging is down, but the guards report seeing figures approaching through the tree line." The room fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and distant gunfire that was getting closer. "How many?" Vance asked. "Unknown, sir. Best guess, maybe 24. They're using the darkness and our electronic blindness to advance." Captain Cross stepped forward. "Sir, we need to evacuate non-essential personnel to FOB Alpha. I can take the lead Chinook and—" "Negative," Vance cut him off. "All aircraft are grounded. Without electronic systems, night flying is suicide." "Sir," Cross pressed, "with respect, we've all done manual flight training." We can handle— I said negative, Captain. I won't risk aircraft and personnel on a manual night flight in hostile conditions. That's when Isadora spoke up from the back of the room, her voice quiet but clear. Sir, with permission, manual night flight isn't suicide if you know what you're doing. Every head turned toward her. In the candlelight she could see the expressions: surprise, annoyance, and from Captain Stone, barely concealed contempt. Lieutenant Blackwell, Colonel Vance said slowly, this is not the time for— Colonel, she interrupted, something she'd never done before, my grandfather flew night missions over Vietnam with nothing but a compass and altimeter. No GPS, no electronic navigation, no automated systems, just basic instruments and practical navigation. It can be done. Captain Stone let out a short laugh. Blackwell, this isn't a training exercise. This is real combat, and you've never even flown a combat mission. Neither have you, she replied calmly. At least not a manual one. The room went dead silent. Stone's face flushed red, even in the dim candlelight. Sergeant Elena Torres broke the tension. Sir, we're getting reports of enemy forces cutting through the eastern fence. They'll be in the compound within 30 minutes. Colonel Vance closed his eyes, weighing options he didn't like. When he opened them again, his expression was grim but decided. We can't defend this position without communications or proper coordination. We need to evacuate to Fob Alpha. He looked directly at Isadora. Lieutenant Blackwell, you said manual night flight can be done. Can you do it? Every person in the room was staring at her. 18 months of being overlooked, dismissed, called backup. It all came down to this moment. Yes, sir, I can do it. The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos. While enemy forces advanced through the darkness, the base personnel scrambled to prepare for emergency evacuation. 23 people needed to get out. Wounded soldiers from the medical bay, essential communications equipment, and the command staff who couldn't be captured. Captain Stone and Captain Cross worked frantically to prep the primary Chinook, but without electrical systems, the process was like trying to perform surgery with medieval tools. Every startup procedure they knew relied on electronic displays and automated checklists. Isadora, meanwhile, went to work on the backup helicopter, an older CH-47D that the mechanics had been planning to retire. It had fewer electronic systems to begin with, which meant fewer things that could fail. More importantly, it still had the original analog instruments that her grandfather had taught her to trust. Owen Fletcher found her in the pilot's seat, running through a manual pre-flight checklist by flashlight. Lieutenant, he said quietly, are you sure about this? I mean, I believe in you, but flying in complete darkness with no electronic navigation. She looked up from the instrument panel. Owen, every other pilot on this base learned to fly with computers doing half the work. They've never had to rely on just their hands and eyes and intuition. But I have. I've been preparing for this my whole life. It was true. While other pilots trusted their GPS and autopilot systems, Isadora had spent hundreds of hours practicing old-school techniques. Dead reckoning navigation, flying by landmark recognition, manual hover control, skills that seemed obsolete until the moment when modern technology failed. The sound of gunfire was getting closer. Through the hangar windows she could see muzzle flashes in the distance. Colonel Vance appeared at the aircraft door. Blackwell, what's your status? Ready to fly, sir. But I need to know, are you absolutely sure about this? Once we're in the air, I'm flying blind. No GPS, no radio contact with Fob Alpha, no way to know if the landing zone is secure. Vance's expression was hard. Lieutenant, in about 10 minutes this base is going to be overrun. The choice isn't between safe and dangerous. The choice is between dangerous and dead. Behind him, Sergeants Kane, Morgan, and Torres were helping wounded soldiers into the aircraft. Medical equipment, ammunition, and essential supplies followed. Every person who climbed aboard was someone whose life now depended entirely on Isadora's ability to do something that everyone else thought was impossible. Captain Stone appeared in the doorway, his face grim. Blackwell, the primary bird won't start? Too many electronic dependencies. Looks like you're our only option. There was no mockery in his voice now, no condescension, just the recognition that the woman they'd called backup had become their only hope. Stone, Isadora said, not looking up from her instrument check. I need a co-pilot, someone to handle navigation and watch for obstacles. You in? He didn't hesitate. I'm in. The CH-47D Chinook lifted off from Fort Meridian at 3:47 a.m., rising into a darkness so complete it seemed solid. No moon, heavy cloud cover, and the complete absence of ground lights created a void that swallowed everything beyond the reach of the aircraft's landing lights. Isadora kept the helicopter low, barely 50 feet above the treetops, using terrain features she'd memorized during daylight flights to navigate toward FOB Alpha. No GPS, no radio beacons, just her knowledge of the landscape and the basic compass heading that would take them north. Captain Stone, sitting in the co-pilot's seat, watched her work with something approaching awe. Her hands moved over the controls with surgical precision, making tiny adjustments to keep them level and on course. She flew the way a musician plays a piano, not thinking about each individual action, but feeling the aircraft as an extension of herself. "How do you know where we are?" he asked through the intercom. "See that ridge line to our left?" She gestured into the darkness. "That's Harper's Ridge. The river curves around it, which means FOB Alpha is bearing 035, about 12 miles. Stone squinted into the blackness. He couldn't see any ridgeline. He couldn't see anything except darkness and the faint glow of their instruments. In the cargo area, the evacuated personnel sat in tense silence. Colonel Vance monitored the wounded soldiers, while Sergeants Kane, Morgan, and Torres kept watch through the small windows. Everyone understood that they were flying through hostile territory with no way to know what was waiting for them. That's when the first tracer rounds lit up the night. "Contact left," Torres shouted over the intercom. "Muzzle flashes, 2 o'clock." Green streaks of light arced toward them through the darkness. The enemy had spotted them. Isadora didn't hesitate. She dropped the helicopter into a steep dive, using a river valley to mask their approach, while enemy gunfire traced their previous position. The maneuver was so sudden and so precise that even Stone grabbed for handholds. "Jesus, Blackwell," he breathed. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" "My grandfather," she replied calmly, pulling them out of the dive and skimming just above the water. "He always said that sometimes the best way to avoid getting shot is to go where the enemy doesn't expect you to go." For the next 15 minutes, she flew a route that would have been impossible to plan on any map. Through valleys that provided natural concealment, around hills that blocked enemy line of sight. Always staying low, always moving, making them a target that was nearly impossible to track or hit. But the most incredible part wasn't her flying, it was her navigation. Without any electronic aids, flying in complete darkness, she somehow maintained perfect situational awareness. She knew exactly where they were going, and how to get there. "FOB Alpha, 2 miles ahead," she announced. Stone looked at his watch. "Blackwell, we've been flying for 28 minutes. According to my calculations, we should still be at least 5 miles out." "Your calculations assume we flew a direct route at standard cruising altitude," she replied. "We didn't." Through the darkness ahead, they could see the faint glow of emergency flares marking the landing zone at FOB Alpha. But as they approached, it became clear that something was wrong. The normal landing lights were dark, the control tower was silent, and there were no signs of activity in the compound. "Looks like FOB Alpha lost power too," Stone observed. "Or worse," Colonel Vance's voice came through the intercom. "We need to assume the base could be compromised." They were running low on fuel, surrounded by hostile territory, approaching a potentially compromised landing zone in complete darkness. Any sane pilot would have turned back. Isadora began her approach to land. What happened next would be talked about for years afterward by everyone who witnessed it. Flying a helicopter in daylight with full electronic systems and ground control support is complex enough. Landing a twin-rotor aircraft at night without any navigation aids on an unprepared landing zone that might be under enemy control, that's the kind of thing that exists only in the realm of theoretical possibility. But Isadora Blackwell didn't deal in theoretical possibilities, she dealt in practical necessities. Using only the helicopter's landing lights and her own intuition, she brought the massive Chinook down in a perfect landing in the center of the FOB Alpha compound. No electronic assistance, no ground crew guidance, no radio communication, just skill, experience, and the kind of precise aircraft control that can't be taught, only developed through years of practice and absolute confidence in one's abilities. The moment the wheels touched down, The aircraft was swarmed by FOB Alpha personnel who had been monitoring the radio frequencies and expecting evacuation flights. Within minutes, the wounded were being transferred to the medical facility, and Colonel Vance was coordinating with the FOB Alpha commander. Captain Stone sat in the co-pilot's seat for a long moment after shutdown, staring at Isadora in the dim glow of the instrument lights. "Blackwell," he said finally, "I owe you an apology. Hell, we all owe you an apology." She looked at him with tired eyes. "No, you don't. You just didn't know what I was capable of. To be honest, neither did I, not really." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been training for this my whole life, but I'd never actually done it. Tonight was the first time I'd ever flown a real manual night mission." She managed a small smile. "I guess we both learned something." Owen Fletcher appeared at the aircraft door, grinning broadly. "Lieutenant, that was the most incredible flying I've ever seen. How did you do it?" "Practice," she replied simply. "And a grandfather who believed that being prepared means being prepared for everything." The aftermath came in pieces over the following days. The electromagnetic pulse that had knocked out all electronic systems across a 50-mile radius had been the opening move in a coordinated attack that ultimately failed because the attackers had relied too heavily on their technological advantages. When their own electronic warfare capabilities backfired and affected their equipment as well, they found themselves no better prepared for manual operations than their targets. Fort Meridian was retaken within 48 hours, with minimal casualties thanks to the successful evacuation of personnel who would have otherwise been trapped in the initial assault. Colonel Vance submitted a recommendation for Valor Award citing Lieutenant Blackwell's extraordinary piloting skills and courage under fire. Captain Stone and Captain Cross both endorsed the recommendation, acknowledging that they could not have accomplished the mission she had pulled off. But the real recognition came in smaller moments. When she returned to the base, other pilots started asking her to teach them manual flight techniques. The old-fashioned methods she'd studied were suddenly relevant again. When new mission assignments were posted, her name appeared on the primary pilot roster. Not as backup, not as substitute, as first choice. When the younger pilots talked about her, they didn't call her backup anymore. They called her the pilot who flew in the dark. 6 months later, Lieutenant Isadora Blackwell was promoted to captain and transferred to Special Operations Command, where her unique skills in manual flight operations made her invaluable for missions that required electronic silence or operations in areas where technology couldn't be trusted. She never sought publicity for what she'd done that night, never gave interviews or wrote articles about her experience. When asked about it, she would simply say that she'd done her job. But her story spread anyway, told by the soldiers whose lives she'd saved, by the pilots who learned from her example, and by the officers who had witnessed something extraordinary. The truth is that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. Sometimes they're the quiet ones in the back of the room. Sometimes they're the people everyone overlooks. Sometimes they're the ones who spend years preparing for a moment that might never come. And sometimes, when everything goes dark and the world seems to be falling apart, those quiet heroes step forward and show us what true strength looks like. Lieutenant Isadora Blackwell had been called weak, a nobody, the quiet one you barely noticed. But when the lights went out and lives hung in the balance, she became exactly what everyone needed. A pilot who could fly without instruments, navigate without GPS, and land safely in conditions that would have defeated anyone else. She became proof that being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's an opportunity to show the world what real strength looks like. This story was brought to you by Quiet Tales Studio. Have you ever known someone who was underestimated until the moment they proved everyone wrong? Share their story in the comments below and let us know what city you're watching from today. If stories like this inspire you, hit that subscribe button and help us continue sharing tales of quiet courage and unexpected heroism. These stories matter, and with your support, we can make sure they're heard. Until next time, remember that the greatest strength often comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the backup plan becomes the only plan that works. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.